With the release of the Modern Warfare 3 campaign, it is time to go back and rank every single Call of Duty campaign from the worst to the best. Of course, I did one of these last year after the Modern Warfare 2 campaign released, but my opinions have actually changed quite a bit since then, and of course now we have Modern Warfare 3 to add, so we will be doing this all over again. I will be excluding the Call of Duties that came before Call of Duty 4, not because I don't enjoy those campaigns, I just think they are severely outdated compared to what we got COD 4 and beyond, and I just don't think they hold up in the same way. They have their own importance, and I really do love them, and I loved them back in the day especially, but today it's just hard to compare, so I don't really think there's a point of talking about them, especially because most of you probably haven't even played them. Coming in last place in the number 16 spot is going to be Black Ops 3, and it really pains me to put it here because this is my favorite Call of Duty of all time. I absolutely adore the multiplayer experience here, and especially the zombies. But when it comes to the campaign, I just have to put it here, and I don't even think it's a bad campaign. I'll just be completely honest with you guys. I don't think a single one of the Call of Duty campaigns is bad, but Black Ops 3 is just simply the weakest, and it's not in the story department. Surprisingly, the story in this campaign is actually kind of brilliant. It's one of the most brilliantly written campaigns Call of Duty has ever done. The problem is that they do an awful job of making it actually clear as to what the hell is going on within the actual campaign itself, and you have to do all sorts of external research on YouTube videos, people explaining it, because the average person is not going to be able to understand what is going on. And normally I like confusing stories, especially in movies, but there always has to be some level of like ability to understand it from a viewer perspective without you having to go do extra work to kind of piece together certain things. And I do kind of enjoy that aspect for certain stories, like the zombie story. I love how confusing the zombie storyline is, but I don't think that really works well for a Call of Duty campaign. I genuinely do think the world building within this campaign is actually really interesting, to the point where I would have loved to have seen another campaign in this exact same universe, kind of building off of it. And I do wish that they implemented the multiplayer specialists into the story in some way, because they have some elements of that there, like of course the 54i is involved in the campaign, but they don't really involve the actual specialist characters themselves. The Black Ops 4 Specialist HQ actually did that, but I really wish they had worked them into the campaign. I think that would have been a cool way to introduce those characters and actually have them be the main playable characters rather than the playable characters we actually get in the campaign, because the playable characters we get are pretty terrible. Pretty much every character in this campaign is really boring, really bland, not interesting. Of course, the story itself and the plot is really interesting. Like I said, it's actually kind of brilliantly written, but the characters just hold no weight, no personality, which makes them extremely uninteresting. I also hated that it didn't connect to the prior Black Ops games like whatsoever. If they wanted to do a completely new story, that's fine, but like why even call it Black Ops 3 then? You know, they could have just called it something else, maybe done like a Black Ops spin-off or something, because the only connection it really has to the Black Ops 1 and Black Ops 2 story was a mention of Raul Menendez, and that was really it. And it's in the same universe, sure, but like there should have been some sort of callbacks and connections to the Black Ops 2 story, because the way Black Ops 2 was a sequel to Black Ops 1 was near perfect. Like the way they did it was so good, but Black Ops 3 holds no sequel weight to that story. The only really part where it's actually a sequel to Black Ops 2 is within the zombie storyline. So I do think they should have reworked that completely and just made it more connected. And even though gameplay wise the multiplayer is my favorite multiplayer in the franchise, is same for zombies, I think it has the best zombies gameplay in the franchise, for some reason the campaign gameplay is not that enjoyable. There's something about it that just doesn't really work well for the campaign formula. Most of the missions are not designed in ways that are that enjoyable. Just the level design itself was kind of poor. I don't really know what was going on there. It almost felt like it was rushed in some aspects. And I think it's fairly obvious why this happened, because the writers of the Black Ops 1 and 2 campaign did not come over to Black Ops 3, and instead they got the Zombies writers to come over to campaign. And I absolutely love the Zombies writers. They are fantastic at what they do, but I don't think that style of writing works well in campaign, and they kind of just translated the exact same writing style where it's very complex, very confusing, a lot of different elements to it, and they kind of translated that to campaign, and I just don't think that was a good idea. They should have stayed with Zombies, done their thing there, and we got some new writers to help with the campaign, because that's kind of what led to this campaign being quite a mess, even if I do think the writing behind it is quite brilliant, and I don't think people kind of give it enough credit for that. In number 15 spot, I've actually got the newest Modern Warfare 3. Not the OG, but the one that just released only just a month ago. Without a doubt, this is the most disappointing campaign in the franchise, because the two prior campaigns that came before this in the Modern Warfare series were really fantastic. And we get this right after. It was easily the most rushed campaign experience I think I've ever played. It felt so underdeveloped, it felt so pointless in a lot of ways. It felt incredibly cheap and small scale, especially when you compare it to the other Modern Warfare games. It does next to nothing with the characters. I feel like only a few of the characters actually had any sort of development here, maybe like Price in a couple moments, Farah, and then you can say Shepard and Graves had their moments, but Soap, Gaz, Ghost, they do literally nothing in this campaign except for have some dialogue here and there, and I couldn't care less about the camaraderie between these characters here. They had a really cool group in the prior games. I loved watching them in Modern Warfare 2, but there is nothing about them in this game that is in any way, shape, or form that interesting. The open combat missions were one of the worst things introduced to a Call of Duty campaign experience, and the fact that it takes up half of the campaign is absolutely insane. They essentially just feel like Spec Ops missions, which are totally fine if they were like side quests or something, but the fact that they are main story missions and they feel so thrown in, they feel like filler, having half the campaign feel like filler is just not a good experience. Are they fun? Can you have some enjoyment with them? Sure, but they are not what you would expect from a Call of Duty campaign experience, and not in a good way. It's also the shortest campaign in Call of Duty history, which isn't in and of itself a bad thing, but when you take into account the fact that barely anything happens within that time, of course it ends up being a very negative thing. And when we're talking about the open combat missions before, even the linear missions themselves, most of them are not that interesting. The locations are not that interesting either. We go to some of the most boring locations I think we've ever seen in a Call of Duty game. You have missions in Verdansk for most of the game, and also in Urkistan. And within those countries, there's barely any interesting locations that you actually get to be a part of. Of course, the final mission with London was really cool, but that was pretty much it. There's really not that many locations that really screamed like, oh, this is actually really cool stuff. And coming off of Modern Warfare 2, which had a heavy focus in Mexico, and I thought the locations in Mexico were awesome, really cool locations, really interesting places to explore, but this game just does not have that. The only positives I can really think of for this campaign is I like some of the stuff they do with Farah's character here. Price has one or two good moments, and I guess I like this version of Makarov. It's kind of hard to tell because we don't really actually get much of him in this campaign. He's in a couple moments in the early parts of the game, but then later on he just kind of randomly appears towards the very end and doesn't really have much impact for the rest of the campaign. The soundtrack was also incredibly disappointing. I felt the same way about Modern Warfare 2, but I think people don't really realize how important music can be to Call of Duty campaigns. So I was really hoping to have a lot of, emotional moments with really great music, and they don't really do that except for in one moment towards the very, very end, but that was basically it. In the number 14 spot, I've got Call of Duty Vanguard. I used to say the problem with this campaign was how disconnected it was, with having 4 different characters with 4 different backstories that you have to focus on through the entire campaign, and you only actually see this group together in the very beginning and the very end. But the more I've thought about it, I don't really think that's a problem, because it actually is an interesting concept with like telling stories from different World War II soldiers and just spending like an hour or two on each of those stories, and then having that group meet up in the end to kind of help each other out with one final conflict. And that, of course, ends in the final mission, which is definitely the best mission in the game. Definitely one of the better missions in COD history, to be completely honest. I actually really like that final mission. But the problem isn't that concept in and of itself. I think that could work. The problem is the execution with it, especially in terms of the characters themselves. I do find all of these characters, except for maybe Polina, most of them are not very interesting. They don't have much personality, and the personality that is there is kind of either just lackluster or just completely uninteresting to me. I do love how this does cover pretty much all parts of the war, at least a lot of parts of the war, whereas Call of Duty World War II, which came out previously to this, of course, prior World War II game to Vanguard, they only covered the European theater, and so getting to see the Pacific theater here, I thought was really awesome, and a lot of the missions are really fun. Like, I don't think this campaign's nearly as bad as a lot of people say. I just think it lacks an interesting overall plot to kind of keep things together. Maybe they should have marketed it as like being a World War II stories campaign, and maybe people would have been more okay with the idea of having these separate stories for the entire campaign. But the way it was marketed, it did not seem that way at all. I thought we were going to have this group for the entire campaign, and we were going to get to see them grow with each other. And I think that was probably the plan. It does seem like the way this game ends, they were building towards a Vanguard sequel, but obviously we're never going to get that. And I don't think people are really too upset about that. In number 13 spot, I have Call of Duty Ghosts. So Call of Duty Ghosts, I think, is a really fun campaign. Like, there's a lot of great missions to it, a lot of big, crazy moments that just blow your mind, like really epic Call of Duty moments here that are really, really fun. but I feel like the writing is just so poor. It's got some of the worst writing in the Call of Duty franchise, which is kind of funny how different this game is from Black Ops 3, where Black Ops 3 I felt like the writing was amazing, but then the game itself just kind of felt kind of boring and uninteresting in a lot of places, whereas Ghosts is really, really fun and crazy, but the writing is just so poor. A lot of it's really contrived. The dialogue is some of the worst dialogue I have ever heard in a Call of Duty campaign.
Dad, this whole time you were one of them. You're a ghost.
Try the ghost. You boys have no idea how hard this was for me. But once I make a choice, there's no turning back. You and your brother still have a lot to learn, but you passed all your tests.
And then, of course, you have probably one of the worst main protagonists in the entire franchise with Logan. And of course, you have Hesh and all the other characters. None of them are interesting. There's not a single character in this entire campaign that I found to be that interesting. Rourke had his moments here and there, but I still feel like he is a really poorly written villain. The only thing holding up this campaign is honestly just how fun some of the missions can be and how crazy they are. I love the setting as well. The apocalyptic setting is just outstanding. It's very unique in that way because there's no other Call of Duty that takes place in the near future in an apocalypse. Like, that's so different, and it makes for some really cool environments and some really cool missions. So that in itself is probably what is making this campaign as enjoyable as it can be sometimes. But when you just realize how bad some of the writing is here, it does kind of hurt it quite a bit. I always did want a Ghost sequel. I was always really excited for one because of how this campaign ends. And I do think that final mission is one of the best final missions in Call of Duty history. But like I said, when the story itself is just so all over the place, it kind of hurts it and holds it back from being a lot better than it could have been. In number 12 spot, I've got Call of Duty Advanced Warfare, and this one's kind of similar to Ghosts, where I think the gameplay itself is actually really fun. There's a lot of cool missions in Advanced Warfare, a lot of cool gadgets you get to play around with, but the writing is just not that great. I think the entire story and even just the character of Jonathan Irons, it all feels very generic, and I've said before that generic is not always a bad thing, but I feel like in this case, it just really made the campaign feel bland in a lot of aspects. But I love some of the missions in this game. There's some really awesome stealth missions. There's one mission on the San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge, which is just absolutely amazing. The cinematics are gorgeous. Like I said before, it has really fun gameplay. There's actually a lot of things you can level up in this campaign, which is really different than any campaign we've experienced before, where you actually get to add some abilities to your exosuit and you get to play around with that. Like, there's of course the grapple gun, and there's other exosuit abilities that you actually unlock yourself just by playing the game, which was a ton of fun to do. This was also the first Call of Duty campaign where I felt like the cutscenes actually looked really amazing. Like, it was a huge leap over Call of Duty Ghosts, which didn't even have cutscenes, and it definitely looked better than Black Ops 2's cutscenes. And I remember back in 2014 when this first released, I was just like blown away that this was a Call of Duty game and these were the graphics we were getting. But graphics are not the most important thing, so it's not like it automatically made this campaign great or anything, but it still was really cool to see how incredible some of those cutscenes looked. But when the overarching story and plot is just uninteresting, it obviously is going to hold back the campaign quite a bit. I think it's a fine campaign, I don't think it's bad, but I just think if you had a more interesting story, a more interesting plot going on, I would probably like it a lot more. In the number 11 spot, I've got Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 2022. Now, if you watched my campaign ranking last year, you might be kind of shocked to see this here, because last year I had Modern Warfare 2 in the number 6 spot. It was incredibly high up, and I do think I was in the honeymoon phase of just really loving the campaign. But over the course of the year, when I've thought about the campaign more, I've replayed it as well, and I just, really tried to analyze the story and what was actually going on, I started to realize there's a lot of issues with this, and especially going into Modern Warfare 3's campaign, I realized how many of those issues actually came to fruition, and I realized this is not as good of a campaign as I originally thought it was. There's of course some positives though. I think the locations were really amazing. I loved getting to go to Mexico in a Call of Duty campaign. We don't really get to see that too often, and a lot of the new storylines going on in Mexico were really interesting, and I actually liked the whole Mexican cartel aspect of it, and characters like Alejandro and Valeria, great new characters that were introduced to the Modern Warfare universe, and I actually really enjoyed getting to experience everything that was happening in that side of the universe. There's some interesting stories with characters like Soap and Ghost. They actually have a lot more to do in this campaign than they did in Modern Warfare 3. Unfortunately though, the characters that really get kind of thrown to the wayside, Farah especially, I mean, she had more to do in Modern Warfare 3, so that was good, but in this game she was kind of like inexistent, had a couple missions here and there that she was in, but wasn't too much there. Even Price didn't really have nearly as much to do as he did in Modern Warfare 2019, so I thought that was a little underwhelming. I thought a lot of the realism to this campaign, just like Modern Warfare 2019 had, was pretty good, but I don't think it was nearly as like gimmicky as it was in 2019's campaign, because that's like the first time where we really got a campaign that felt so immersive and realistic. And so this game, it just didn't really feel like it had that same pull to it, but it was still definitely there. There's also a lot of unique missions in this campaign that involve crafting items as you go along, especially the last mission. And I thought that's really unique. It's a new feature added to campaigns that we've never seen before, where you get to like pick up items as you go along through the play space and use them to build different weapons. It's a very unique thing, but the problem is they don't really go too far with it. It literally only exists in like 2 missions and that's it, and they don't really touch it again. So I felt like if it was more of a recurring feature, it would have been better, but because it was only used once or twice, just kind of felt a little weird. And then onto the negatives, the soundtrack, not very good compared to some of the other Modern Warfare games. It is really underwhelming. It's just remixes a lot of the music from Modern Warfare 2019, and any of the new music is just, it just doesn't really sound like it's that good. It's not very, existent either. There's not many memorable pieces of music either. That was definitely something I was very disappointed by, even with Modern Warfare 3's campaign. The gameplay elements, some of them were kind of annoying, especially armored enemies. I think that was one of the worst things ever introduced to this campaign. We've had armored enemies before, but the armored enemies were so common in this campaign. Like, I feel like every single mission, you would come across so many of them, and it just messed up the play space so much because it doesn't really fit in this universe. We're playing in this very grounded, very gritty, very realism-focused campaign universe, and to come across guys who have like way too much health, it just kind of takes you out of it, and they're just not fun to go up against. Like, I don't think bullet sponges are ever going to be that enjoyable. There's some, armored enemies we've had in the past campaigns that I thought worked okay because they used them sparingly, and when they did show up, they made sense in the, play space that you were playing in. But this, it would just be like randomly, you'd have armored enemies come out of nowhere, and it would just happen so frequently, it kind of got annoying. One of the worst things about the campaign is that it doesn't really feel like a proper sequel to Modern Warfare 2019, and I feel like it should have, because we're getting a trilogy here, right? That's kind of the whole purpose of this. Now we're probably going to get way more than just a trilogy, but it felt like they needed to kind of follow each game, just like the original Modern Warfare trilogy did. They had a connective tissue between them, but this game doesn't really have that connective tissue. The only thing that's really connecting them is the characters just appearing again. And so it kind of just, everything felt so odd, especially first time going through it. It felt like they were almost trying to do like a Modern Warfare anthology series where every single Modern Warfare game was going to tell a completely different story. Obviously, that's not their plan, and we know that, going into Modern Warfare 3, we know that's not their plan, but it just felt so odd. The villain was also one of the weakest in the franchise with Hassan. I didn't think he was interesting whatsoever. Of course, we had some other side villains there as well, but I thought all of them were kind of just whatever. They were fine, they weren't bad, but they were not interesting in the slightest. Definitely a good Call of Duty campaign, but I wouldn't call it a great one. In the pretend spot, I've got Call of Duty World War II, which is definitely the best Sledgehammer Games Call of Duty campaign, and I actually think this one's really underrated. The only criticism I really ever hear for it is that it doesn't really portray World War II that accurately. There's some like historical inaccuracies there, and it also doesn't cover the Pacific theater. It's only based on the European theater. And look, I understand those complaints, and some of those criticisms make sense, but I honestly don't really care. Like, I have a lot of fun with this campaign. I think it's a really well-made campaign. I think the characters are fantastic, some of the best characters in the entire franchise. You have, of course, Daniels, Zussman, Turner, and Pearson, and just tons of other guys on this team, and they're just so entertaining to watch. And you genuinely care for these characters because they have a bond with each other. They genuinely care for each other as this campaign goes along.
Zussman 3 times in 10 seconds, and he's all yours.
I don't know.
Oh, you could always puss out.
My money's on Zussman.
Okay, I'm in.
I can't watch.
Just time me when I tell you. Back to my story. Me and my boys, we muscle our way into this poker game that the football team has going. We worked out a system where they can signal to me everybody's hands. You should have seen the QB's face when I took that pot. You ready? Now. You get flushed.
And I mean, you start off with D-Day, which is obviously really crazy. And yes, the D-Day mission, it's not the perfect example of how to portray D-Day, but I think it does its job for the most part. And as you go through the campaign, I think you have so many incredible missions, like the one mission where you're going through that Nazi base and you have to like sneak around and talk to different people. They have a couple missions like that in later campaigns as well. There's also a mission where you have to save this little girl and like sneak through a building with the little girl in your arms. There's just a lot of really great moments like that. I honestly don't have any major criticisms. The only thing I can think of is some of those historical inaccuracies, but like I said, they don't really bother me that much. There's some new gameplay elements with this as well, where each character has a specific ability that can help you. So of course you're playing as Daniels, which is a very great protagonist, by the way. Out of all the protagonists we've seen, it's one of the most emotive. He actually talks a lot and he has a big part to play in the story. He's not a silent protagonist, which I really like. But each of the characters around you can help you in different ways. So like one character can give you meds, for example, to heal. One character can give you ammo. The other character can give you like a better line of sight or something like that. There's a lot of different abilities that each character has, and I really love how the game plays around with that. Overall, it's a pretty good campaign. It deserves to be in this spot. In number 9 spot is going to be Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, and some of you might be shocked to see it this low on the list, but honestly, it's a solid campaign. It's pretty good, but I do think it's semi-overrated, and I think a big part of its overratedness comes from the fact that it was so innovative for its time, and I think that's the most important thing to take away from this campaign, is that without this campaign, we wouldn't have gotten all of the fantastic campaigns that came later on, and honestly, we probably wouldn't have gotten much of the Call of Duty franchise in general, so you got to give it a lot of credit there, and it's a pretty solid campaign all around. There's a lot of great moments to it. Of course, the 2016 remaster of this campaign, it's just the same campaign, but a lot better, obviously, because there's better graphics, better animations, all of that's a lot cleaner. And ever since that came out, it obviously just made it so much more enjoyable because you get to experience it with these next generation graphics and mechanics. And it's a very simple story. It's not that complex when you really look into it, which I think is kind of what takes away from it a little bit, because it doesn't go as deep with the characters as I feel like Modern Warfare 2 and 3 does. The locations certainly aren't that interesting in this campaign either, especially when you compare it to Modern Warfare 2 and 3. But again, like, this is just a very simplistic campaign, and if you like that, then cool. But I just think I got a lot more out of some of the later campaigns, but this one doesn't really do anything that wrong. It's fine, and like I said, very innovative, very big for its time. I just think some of the later campaigns are just a lot better. In the number 8 spot is going to be World at War, which similarly to COD 4, I think it definitely doesn't have the same amount of depth as some of the later Call of Duty campaigns, but it still is really amazing with its simplicity. It's definitely one of the darkest and grittiest campaigns of all time. It does not hold back whatsoever. It shows you the true horrors of World War II. I think it does it a lot better than COD World War II does, but I think what holds it back a little bit is obviously not having that depth, and it also doesn't have nearly as many interesting characters as some of the other campaigns. Obviously, Reznov is incredible, probably one of the best Call of Duty characters of all time, but that's just one character, and you don't really get to see that much depth from really any other characters in this campaign. And the soundtrack is just so good. It's so like horrific in its way. It's scary, it's eerie, and it plays so well into a lot of these missions. And some of the best moments in COD history come from this campaign. Just some of the craziest missions you'll ever see, with, you know, the Black Hat mission where you're in top of the turret gunner shooting down at the boats down below, and of course the very end of the campaign with Reznov saving you, and it's just so cool, and I can't help but love it. But it just doesn't have that story depth that I really want from a campaign, and I do feel like all the Call of Duties above this do provide that a lot better. In number 7 spot, I've got Black Ops Cold War, and this is a campaign that probably has some of the most depth out of any of the campaigns. It's very, very deep. There's so many interesting themes with CIA and mind control and everything that goes on in the Cold War, and obviously Black Ops 1 had all of that as well. So this, in essence, really did feel like the true sequel to Black Ops 1, which is exactly what it was trying to be, but even more so than what Black Ops 2 was, and I think it does a great job of continuing the Black Ops 1 story. The only thing that it does not do a great job in, and I will always hold it against this campaign, is what the hell did they do with Woods and Alex Mason here? They are barely in this campaign. They really don't do much either. Like, this campaign is primarily focused on Adler, Bell, and all those other characters. You don't really get much of Woods and Mason, and their actual place in this campaign is, they could have been replaced with anyone. They could have been literally any generic soldier, and it would have made little to no difference on this campaign. So I don't really know why that happened. I think it had something to do with just the development process of this campaign. I think originally it was meant to be a complete reboot, which is why, you know, originally they weren't going to have that big of a role in the story, but then they decided to make it a Black Ops 1 sequel, so they had to throw in Woods and Mason somehow, and then it ended up, messing everything up, and they were like, what are we gonna do with them? We don't know what to do with them, so they just kind of threw them in there for a couple campaign missions, and they didn't really have much impact on the story. So that's the only part of this that really holds it back. But the story itself, the plot, and the other characters, especially Adler being one of the best COD campaign characters of all time, that stuff is incredible, and I will always praise this campaign for that. It's also one of the only campaigns that actually gives us choices and separate endings based on those choices. Now, they're not nearly as major as Black Ops 2's choices, because those could actually create tons of different endings, whereas here, they're not like that different in terms of how they change the story. Usually it's just one character will be there instead of another character, and then of course the ending has two completely different endings that you can go with. You can either side with the Soviets, or you can, of course, stay with your own team. And it's kind of gimmicky because obviously siding with the Soviets is not canon in the universe, because it wouldn't really make any sense, because you kill Woods, Mason, and all the other characters there. So it wouldn't really make sense for that to be canon whatsoever to the Black Ops universe. But it is kind of cool. The first time seeing it especially, it was like, oh my god, what is happening? But I think the ending itself, the actual good ending, is still kind of anticlimactic. I think it's definitely one of the most anticlimactic campaign endings out there. But the rest of the campaign is pretty solid. There's a lot of great missions. I love the red light, green light mission, one of the coolest locations for a Call of Duty campaign mission ever. There's a lot of locations like that in this campaign, because the 80s is such a cool aesthetic, such a cool setting for a COD campaign. The music is amazing. All that like 80s synth is just, it is so good. You have so many moments like that in this campaign. There's a lot of 80s songs they also find their way into this campaign somehow, and it all works perfectly. You have those Vietnam flashback missions, which one of them is very trippy, one of the trippiest missions you'll ever play in a COD campaign. There's even a little zombie portion of that mission as well, but then the other one is also just kind of more of a straightforward Vietnam mission. But it was cool to see some Vietnam missions in Call of Duty again, because the last time we've seen them was obviously in Black Ops 1, so that was cool. And on top of all the different character choices, you also get dialogue options with some of the characters to just try to learn more about the characters, which I think is a great way to organically let us learn about these characters without kind of like shoving it into the main story and padding out the runtime to be even longer, because all of those character dialogue options are optional, right? You don't have to talk to the characters between the missions, but you can do it if you want, and you get so much information out of the characters. I think Park especially, she's actually a really interesting character that otherwise, if you didn't do any of those dialogue options, you probably wouldn't know nearly as much about her and she wouldn't be as interesting. But getting to learn more about her makes her a more interesting character, and that goes for a lot of the characters there as well. So great feature there. I would love to see something like that return again, because it doesn't really include all the different choices, because the different dialogue options you make don't really make a big difference in like your relationship with the characters, but it just allows you to have that choice of learning more about them. You don't have to, but you can if you want. Overall, a very great campaign, definitely one of my favorites in the franchise, but there's just a few of those issues that were bringing it down a bit. In the number 6 spot, I've got Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2019, and this campaign is really great. I freaking love it. I love how realistic and gritty this one is, and for the most part, I don't care about realism in like other modes, like in multiplayer and zombies. I don't really care about realism. I don't need it, but in campaign, I feel like it actually helps a lot. And especially in this campaign, because this game was so focused on realism and, immersion, it actually makes the campaign a lot better, because some of those missions, they literally look like real footage. If you watch this campaign, you watch the clips, if you show it to like an 80-year-old woman, she might actually think it's real life. Like she might think she's watching some CCTV footage from like some military stuff, like genuinely speaking, because that's how real this looks, especially the clean house mission. Like the animations and the movements, everything just looks so real and gritty, and it is really immersive because I think it works so well. And of course, the story itself is pretty good in this campaign. It's, not the craziest storyline we've ever seen in a COD campaign, but it makes everything so much more interesting because you actually feel like you're there as a character. It's even just the little things, like there's a flashback mission where you're playing as Farah when she was much younger, so she's obviously less experienced with a gun, so when she uses a gun, it actually takes longer for her to reload, and she has more recoil with the gun than you would normally in a normal mission. That's like such a cool little aspect that like you wouldn't expect to see in a Call of Duty campaign, but I love that attention to detail. They do so much stuff like that in this campaign where there's just so much attention to detail that I freaking love that shit. The locations were definitely lacking, just like the original Call of Duty 4 Modern Warfare, and I guess it's unavoidable because the storyline was just taking place in, you know, the Urkistan, Verdansk area, so of course most of the missions are going to take place there, but I just kind of got bored of those locations after a while. But the mission in Piccadilly is awesome. That's definitely one of my favorite COD campaign missions of all time, where you get to deal with this terrorist attack in Piccadilly, and there's actually a couple interesting villains in this campaign as well. You have Barkov and you also have the Wolf. And the new rebooted versions of these characters, you don't have all the rebooted versions yet, of course, but you have Price, Gaz, and then of course you have some new characters like Farah and Alex, and I think they're really solid characters, and they're definitely at their peak in this game as well. They don't ever get better than in this game. This is where these characters are the best, and where I think they have the most interesting stories, the most interesting dialogue, and just the overall plot that's going on here is also just the most interesting out of all of the new Modern Warfare Trilogy campaigns. In the number 5 spot, I've got Black Ops 1. Definitely one of the most unique Call of Duty campaigns, especially for its time. I mean, think about it. It came out in 2010, and before this, the only campaigns we've ever had were either just World War II Call of Duties or the 2 Modern Warfare titles, which none of these went nearly as in-depth and crazy with its story as Black Ops 1 did, with all the creepy CIA mind control stuff that was going on in it. It's just so interesting, and the way the story plays with Mason being interrogated the whole campaign, and you have no idea who's interrogating him, and when you find out what happens in the very end of the campaign, your mind is blown. And just like Cold War, you do have a really good twist there. And the game itself, I think the characters are fantastic. Some of the best campaign characters we've ever had, with Alex Mason, Frank Woods, Hudson. Of course, the villain being Drakovich, not the best villain we've ever seen, but he's still pretty interesting. And you have these missions where like Rezanov appears, but he's not actually there. He's just kind of in Alex's mind. And stuff like that is just so unique, a really unique way of bringing that character back into the story without actually, you know, forcefully bringing him back as like an actual livable character. He's only livable in that one mission in Vorkuta, which is one of the best campaign missions of all time. I think the only thing holding us back is, of course, that villain. I don't think Drakovich is nearly as good as some of the other villains that we have in some of these other campaigns, but everything else, man, this campaign is fucking awesome. One of the most unique things this campaign does is it actually plays around with real-world characters and real-world events. I mean, you literally have John F. Kennedy in this campaign, which is insane. And then there's tons of real-world events that they actually cover, and it was kind of shocking to see them actually cover these events, but they put a huge twist on it with showing everything that's going behind the scenes from the CIA perspective, which is, I think, what makes this campaign so unique and so interesting. And I also love how it actually does follow up World at War. Like, it feels like a sequel to World at War, not even just with Rezanov being, you know, in the game itself, but you even have a mission that goes back and it shows what happened after the World at War campaign with Rezanov and Dmitry and what led to Rezanov getting put into the Vorkuta prison. And it even shows the death of Dmitry, which is just so freaking cool. Like, the stuff like that is just so awesome that they were able to do that. Like, it's not even a sequel in its name. It's not titled World at War 2. It's a completely different title, but it plays like a sequel to World at War. So I and many others would consider World at War, Black Ops 1, and Black Ops 2 as like the main Black Ops trilogy, because those 3 games have major connections, whereas Black Ops 3 obviously did not have many connections when it comes to the campaign itself. So I do think this plays as a pretty decent sequel. It's not that connected otherwise, but of course, having that layer there with Rezanov and the attachment to Project Nova and everything like that, I think is brilliant. The writing here is so damn good, easily some of the best writing in the entire franchise. In the number 4 spot, I've got Modern Warfare 3, the OG one, of course, not the new one. This campaign is so amazing. It's got some of the most emotion in the franchise with, of course, the death of Soap, which, I mean, that's definitely one of the most emotional moments in the franchise, because that's genuinely a character you started to care about as you got to this point in the series.
Oh no, 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 no! Soap! No, no, no! I'm sorry.
Obviously, you know, if this happened in Modern Warfare 2 or COD 4, you probably wouldn't care as much, but because it happens here where you have played with this character, you either play as him or you played next to him for 3 games straight, you're obviously going to care about him. And of course, he had this connection with Price over the course of the campaign, so I absolutely love everything that led up to that moment. But one of the best things about Modern Warfare 3 is just the fact that it is World War III in full force. And of course, that's how this game was marketed. It was marketed as being a World War III Call of Duty game. Obviously, that started within Modern Warfare 2, but it really went full force in this game, where you had so many different countries, so many different locations being utilized in this campaign. You go to New York City, there's a whole battle in New York City. Before this campaign released, I never thought we'd be having a mission in a Call of Duty game where we'd be fighting in a full-blown battle in New York City, which is really crazy, and the stakes are obviously huge because of that. You also have missions in London, Paris, Germany, South America, so many different locations here, which I think makes it one of the most diverse campaigns we've ever seen in terms of where you're going from mission to mission. Absolutely love that stuff. There was some stuff that was a bit over the top, and some people complain about that. They say, oh, this campaign's a little too over the top for me. But at the end of the day, I think it's part of the charm of these campaigns. Like, it's obviously taking, military things, and it's just kind of showing what extreme it could go to if we got into a giant war. Would it go down just like it does in this game? Probably not, but it's fictional. We're trying to enjoy a good story, interesting characters, interesting plots, and I do think this campaign provides that. There's so many little elements with different countries being involved within this war here, and that's what makes it so insanely huge and so depth. I mean, when you compare this to the newest Modern Warfare 3, it's night and day difference. I mean, you have so much more going on in this campaign, and the missions are really fun, really crazy, lots of explosions, lots of insanity, and like I said, the characters are actually pretty good here. When you talk about the OG Modern Warfare trilogy, I think the characters are at their best here. You have, of course, Price and Soap, which are definitely the GOATs here. Yuri is really great. He's a new character that I think is fantastic, and his connections to Makarov was really interesting to learn about. And you obviously have that mission where you kind of get to even see what happened with him right before No Russian from Modern Warfare 2. Again, a lot more you're learning about the whole Modern Warfare universe. You're learning about things that happened all the way back even in COD 4 in this campaign. And then you also have the whole storyline trying to save the president's daughter as part of the Delta Force, and you're playing as Frost, and there's a lot of characters there, and they're not like the best characters ever. They're more so generic soldiers, but I love those missions as well, because those are where you get some of the really crazy large scale sequences, some amazing set pieces. I mean, just going around this campaign and just, looking into the sky and seeing all the battles stuff going on, it blows your mind, and that is the type of shit we should be getting from Call of Duty campaigns. The Turbulence mission, where you're literally on the plane and the president is getting taken, the president's daughter is getting taken, that shit was incredible. Just going through a plane that's literally going down, and you're like floating in the plane, shooting people while you're in it. And then of course you go to the final mission where your goal is just to kill Makarov. That's all Yuri and Price want to do after what happened to Soap. That's their mission. They just want to kill Makarov, and they go into that place, they go into the hotel with guns, with giant LMGs, and they just start lighting Makarov's men up. It is such a fantastic mission, such a fantastic ending to this trilogy. It's a masterpiece. This campaign is incredible. But it's not the best Modern Warfare campaign, because of course, in the number 3 spot is going to be Modern Warfare 2, the original. This one is just a bit better. I think it's just a sliver better. I don't think it's that much better, but it's definitely better. And I think the reason it's better is because of the build-up to World War III here. Of course, in Modern Warfare 3, you jump right into it. Like, you're already there. Everything is crazy. The world is in shambles. Everything's just going insane, right? But in this game, it starts off kind of chill. Like, you just, it's been like, I think 8 years since COD 4, something like that in the storyline. And everything's kind of fine. There's some stuff going on, but nothing's too crazy. And then once No Russian happens, that's when shit goes down. That's like one of the most shocking missions in Call of Duty history, obviously, because you're literally playing as an undercover terrorist, and you could shoot innocent people if you want, but you don't have to. Of course, you have that option to not do it, and it's definitely one of the most shocking moments out there. But when you learn about the storyline implications about what's going on there, because of course they were trying to blame it on the Americans. That's why there was the whole No Russian thing, because they wanted to blame it on the Americans to start this war, and that's exactly what ends up happening. And then you get these missions with the Rangers, and they're just literally in United States of America fighting off against the Russians. The soundtrack in this campaign is by far one of the best in the entire franchise, and I mean, especially the way it plays in some of these missions. Like, for example, when the war is first actually happening and you're playing as Ramirez, just walking through the streets of this suburban neighborhood, and you just see all the mayhem that's going on, and this really like emotional piece of music's playing, it really hits you. And then later in the campaign, you have more missions like that where you're just going through literally the White House, and there's just this really intense music playing because it's showcasing how insane this situation is for these characters. And then you just go to the other characters, of course. You have, you know, Price, Soap, Ghost here as well, which Ghost and Roach, they're new characters. They're not that great. They do have that really emotional moment where they both die. I don't think it's like the most emotional moment in the campaign. I definitely can see the emotion there, but this moment's not amazing because of that. It's not amazing because it's like that sad to see them die. It's amazing because of the twist, to see Shepard betray you. A lot of people saw it coming. A lot of people thought it was predictable, but personally for me, I did not see it coming. And when that first happened, I was blown away. And then that whole campaign after that just is insane. You have this mission where you're playing as Soap and he's trying to escape a boneyard, and he has, you know, Makarov's men and Shepard's men coming at him at once, and he does not know what the hell to do, and you're just running through crowds of people. Stuff like that's just so fantastic. This is, of course, when the COD campaign started to get a little bit more over the top, but again, that makes them more entertaining and makes the plot way more interesting, so I was completely fine with that. All in all, this campaign is obviously a masterpiece. In number 2 spot, I've got Black Ops 2, which this is definitely an unpopular opinion to have Black Ops 2 above Black Ops 1, but hear me out. There is one reason why this is the best Black Ops campaign, and it's because of Raul Menendez, who is easily the best Call of Duty campaign villain of all time. Menendez is just such a broken character who's dealt with so much, and he lets all his anger out on the world, and his worldview here is just so unique and interesting. It's so fucked up, and I think the one thing that makes him a lot better than a villain like Makarov, for example, who, don't get me wrong, of course Makarov's a fantastic villain, but why Menendez is better is because he's more personal to the main characters. He has more of a connection to them because of what he's done to them, what he's taken from them. And that's not something that's kind of like thrown in the very end of the campaign where, oh, he kills someone important to the character's very end. No, we literally get to see a flashback mission of what Menendez did to these characters. And that, of course, was with Frank Woods and Alex Mason. And of course, him getting Alex killed, or at least in some of the outcomes, depending on how you did your story. But he could have gotten Alex Mason killed. And then, of course, he does kill Hudson in one of the most brutal scenes in any COD campaign ever. I think it's probably the best scene in any COD campaign. And then he just leaves Frank brutally wounded by shooting him in the kneecaps. Like, no villain has been this brutal before and done such stuff like this in front of our main characters, and the intensity you feel with this man on screen. His entire design, he looks really cool. The voice acting is amongst some of the best in the franchise as well. I think his voice acting is wonderful.
An American torched the warehouse for insurance money, $11,000. That was the value they placed on her life. She was the reason for me to live. What about you, David? Is it me? Einstein once said that the economic anarchy of capitalism is the real source of evil. Your father and his people took Josefina from me. Pues, tu papá está muerto. Your father is dead. And his people finished.
And the way his character ends as well, it's all so well written. It's hard for me not to call this one of the best campaigns. Of course, just like Cold War, you do have a bunch of different story choices to make, but these choices actually make a much bigger difference on the ending. There's actually like over 6 different outcomes, I believe, that could happen in the end, and a lot of them are very interesting. It actually gave you a reason to replay the campaign a bunch and try out the different endings. I think it does make it a bit confusing for them to possibly do a follow-up to this, which is probably why Black Ops 3 didn't even try to follow up this campaign, because there were so many different endings, it didn't really know which one to choose as like the canon ending. But you have a lot of interesting outcomes here that, like I said, there's some that I like way more than others. I think the ones where Menendez ends up alive in the end is definitely way more interesting than him just dying. So I usually like to keep him alive. But then there's also some endings where Alex Mason's actually still alive, which I think was kind of, I didn't really like that one too much. I think his death was so well done that I actually prefer him staying dead for the story. I think it makes a lot more sense and it's actually way more impactful. And there's also one where Menendez will kill Frank Woods. And again, a lot of unique endings, but I do think it adds a lot more to the campaign, just knowing that there's a bunch of different choices you can make and that can make a difference on what's going on. And I love how this campaign takes place in the future, but also in the past. You get those missions in the 80s as well as the missions in the future. I think that just adds so much to this campaign, especially because they're very connected. Obviously, it's not just like random flashbacks. No, the flashbacks have a great story importance to what's going on with Menendez in the future events. And there's a lot of great missions in the past, but also, of course, the future stuff is great. You have Alex Mason's son, David Mason, who's also a really great character. Who would think that his son would also be a great character? Obviously, it makes sense why he would be, but he is great. You have Harper, who I absolutely love. I mean, of course, he's voiced by Michael Rooker, so how can you not love him? And then you also have Salazar, which he's fine. He's not that great of a character, but he's interesting. He has this kind of like betrayal later on in the campaign, which it was okay. It wasn't the coolest thing ever, but it was still a good aspect to this campaign. And lastly, the missions are just really fun. I think gameplay-wise, this is definitely one of the best in the franchise. There's a lot of cool gadgets you get to mess around with, just like with Advanced Warfare, but this was the first time we got to see that because, of course, it was the first campaign in the future. But even the ones in the past, you still have some cool gadgets. Like there's like a bear trap you can use if you find these little areas that you can access during the missions. You can just like use these like fun little traps, which you don't have to use them. They're all optional, but they're fun. They're interesting. And there's some of the best missions in the franchise in this game as well. So definitely one of my favorites. Soundtrack is a banger as well all around. I absolutely love the soundtrack, especially during that whole club sequence. I mean, that shit goes hard. So yes, Black Ops 2 is an incredible campaign. And in the number one spot, if you know me by now, you knew this was coming, Infinite Warfare. This is without a doubt the best campaign in the franchise. It's one of my favorite video game stories ever as well. And I think it's so underrated and such a shame that so many people wrote off this game just from the reveal trailer and just didn't even buy the game because they thought it was gonna not be worth it. But even if you don't like the multiplayer and the zombies here, which I personally love the multiplayer and zombies in this game, but even if you don't, it is so worth giving this campaign a chance because it is one of the best storylines you will ever play in gaming. It has some of the best characters as well. Actually, no, scratch that. It has the best characters in the Call of Duty franchise. Nick Reyes, Nora Salter, and Ethan alone. Those three characters alone clear any other Call of Duty campaign. But you have other ones as well. You have Omar, you have the Admiral, you have even the villain Koch. I know a lot of people don't like him as a villain, but I actually do. I don't think he's the best villain ever, not even close, but I do think he's pretty good for what he is. And then you have a bunch of other side characters like Kashima, Griff, and Gator, and so many more that just have so much personality to them. I think by far, this is the most character-driven campaign experience. I think that's why it's my favorite, because I love character-driven stories above anything else. Like, of course, you could have a great plot, you could have a lot of spectacle, a lot of crazy action sequences, but if you don't have amazing characters that are really well written, really interesting, really entertaining, have a lot of story to them, and they're the ones who drive the plot forward, if you don't have that, you're not going to be my favorite of anything. So that is what Infinite Warfare is able to do so successfully. It takes you on this experience with the characters that you care so much about all the way up to the end of the campaign. Nick Reyes specifically is my favorite Call of Duty character of all time because he has such a motivation to get everyone home safely, and he knows as a leader that's like he has to make hard choices sometimes, because if he doesn't leave people behind, maybe he'll get more people killed, or maybe he won't complete the mission in the first place. And the whole war going on in this game with everything involved in it, I think it's really interesting. It's really unique having people go to other planets for resources, as the whole point here is that Earth is kind of like not sufficient in its resources anymore. They're so far in the future to the point where that's becoming a problem. And then you have other groups, other organizations kind of setting out to stop Earth from trying to get other resources from other planets, and the war that creates because of that. I think it's really unique and interesting, but that's not even the most important part of the campaign. The most important part is just Nick Reyes as a character and what he's willing to do for his people to try to make sure they get home safe while still trying to complete the mission. And the fact that by the end of the campaign, he fails in trying to keep everyone safe, but he does succeed in the mission itself. He realizes at the very end of the campaign that he cannot get everyone home safely. He knows it's not going to be a possibility anymore, and he has to make that sacrifice for his whole team, except for just like 4 of them, which is so fucking well written, and the development of that character throughout the campaign to get to that point is outstanding.
Fire on my position, Salter!
I can't do that, Nick!
Nora, finish the mission. That's an order.
All stations, warship is green to engage! Guns, swivel down to one! Open fire, open fire! Incoming necessary, 2 points! On counter measure! Hold on! Concentrate fire!
And I think one of the reasons I do like Koch as a villain is because he is a complete contrast to Nick Reyes and his character, because he is not the type of person who is trying to save his men. He believes in victory at any cost and is willing to sacrifice his men and even himself if it meant winning. And of course, that's what Nick has to do in the end, which is so awesome when the main protagonist has to utilize some sort of a philosophy from the antagonist in order to be victorious in the end. It's so fucking brilliant, and I hate that so many people don't give this campaign the love it deserves. I also love how it takes you on the whole journey start to finish. There's not a lot of cuts in this campaign. If you actually just play through it without stopping, it takes you on most of the journey. You actually get to fly to space the first time you jump in that jet. It does not throw you into a cutscene. There's a lot of cutscenes here and there, of course, and the cutscenes are gorgeous. Probably the best looking cutscenes in the entire Call of Duty franchise. I'm not kidding. I think they look better than even the newer cutscenes in some of these recent games. I prefer how they look in this one. And those scenes, of course, they're fantastic, but most of the time they don't even cut with cutscenes. A lot of the time, they literally just have you flying yourself to space from a planet. Like, that is mind-blowing. It is easily one of the best looking campaigns, especially for its time when it came out in 2016. It blew me away looking at this campaign for the first time. It is cinematic, it is large scale, and it is balls to the wall all the way through, and getting to explore different planets. And the coolest thing is that these are actual real planets. They didn't make up fictional planets. A lot of people think that the planets in this game are fictional. They're all real things. They're either real obtainable planets or they're moons on different planets. Those are the places we're exploring. We're not exploring fictional places, which I think is really cool. Obviously, it's fictional because it's so far in the future to the point where we don't have these actual things today. But this is assuming there's going to be a time in the future where we can actually explore these places, if that's ever going to be possible. And that's what this campaign does. And I think it's so freaking awesome that it does that. The dialogue is actually really great. It's really organic. Everything sounds like things that actual human beings would say. It doesn't sound out of place or contrived or cringy like some dialogue in some other COD campaigns does. Everything feels so real, and that's again what makes the characters feel so down to earth. These are, soldiers, these are fighters, but they feel like just average people because of their conversations. They don't feel fake and made up made up heroes almost. They don't feel like made up action heroes. They are just people fighting in a war, trying to live. And of course, a lot of them don't, which I think is one of the most impactful parts of this campaign, is that most of them die by the end of it.
Probably get a Purple Heart for this, huh? I don't impress, Lieutenant.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, she'll love it.
I can still fight.
I know you can, Marine. We're gonna get you back out there in no time.
Brooks, where's that med kit? Let's go!
Is that Marine, sir?
And you have that moment in the end credits where you just get to listen to the different dialogues from these characters. They made their own tapes, kind of talking to their families and saying goodbye just in case they don't live through this war. It's fucking so sad. It's the first time I ever actually cried playing a Call of Duty campaign. None of the other ones made me tear up. Even though there's emotional moments in other ones, none of them made me tear up. This is the first one that genuinely got tears out of me. And it was because of that end credits where you get to listen to the tapes that these characters recorded for their families. It is so beautiful. And of course, it has a fantastic soundtrack. I cannot get enough of the soundtrack in this game. It's probably my favorite soundtrack in the entire COD franchise, so have to point that out real quick.
Go! Go! All right, hold up. Griff, take lead.
I'll stay down here with my Marines. Buy you some time, sir.
No, you go up with the captain. I'll stay here.
Take these.
Get going. I'll live for a good gunfight.
You three, stay with Griff.
Give him hell, Captain.
Definitely the #1 best Call of Duty campaign of all time. If you haven't played it yet, please go do yourself a favor and play it because it is worth it. And that is going to do it for my Call of Duty campaign ranking. Let me know your guys' thoughts in the comment section down below. Which COD campaigns are your favorites? Which are your least favorites? I would love to hear it. I would love to do more COD campaign rankings. If you guys are interested, I'm definitely down for it. Maybe like character rankings or even mission rankings. Now, I do have a big plan for a mission ranking video in the future, but that probably won't come out till the next campaign comes out because it's a really big video that'll probably take me a long time to develop. So I might as well wait till the next campaign comes out for that. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. I will see you on my next one. Peace out.